I want to talk about healthcare with the focus on healthcare in America and um, how um, how blockchain technology uh, changes things and kind of the future that I see for blockchain in healthcare. Um, so, shall we just get started?
Yes, please.
All right. The core problem that I see is that patients don't have their healthcare data, and or the ones who have it. For example, people like me, I have access to the electronic medical records, but I still don't have my own data in an easily accessible form. So healthcare in America is like a ball of entangled wool with entrenched interests like the knots. So what are the downstream effects that happen because of this core problem? So there's obviously an increased burden of paperwork. So I'm almost embarrassed to admit that healthcare data is shared through fax in America. I don't know what it is like in Europe, but it's everybody's faxing here, no matter how technologically savvy you are, because you have to um, work at the pace of the person who's the most behind, right? So and because sometimes I fail to receive the healthcare records of patients, I have to order tests that I know they probably have had done in the recent past. So that increases economic burden on the country. Then the other thing I see is that we randomly pick our doctors, right? We often do Google search or word of mouth recommendations, but it it kind of sounds a little primitive when we have things like machine learning and AI. That why can't we have a better search? Why can't we look at the patient's health data, or you can call it health resume, to find the right doctor, and not just the doctor's information. So, and because the data is siloed, like here we have Stanford University Hospital, so that has its own data, and doesn't it's hard to share it. And then another practice will have their own data, and different practices will have different electronic medical records, and it's almost impossible to freely share this data, even though doctors and patients want to. And it leads to a lack of possibility of having national research, let alone global. Um, so we haven't, we are nowhere near going global when it comes to healthcare, whereas, other industries are like, this is really lagging behind. Um, and another thing that I see is medication is an undifferentiated good, but it's not been disintermediated. Supply chain keeps a large chunk of final price. Medications are really expensive in America. Um, and the other problem we run into is finally, if I keep chasing the data, my assistant probably spends 25% of his time trying to get records from other doctors. And finally, when I get this record, I get a huge stack of papers that I have to now go through, and it only creates a burden on me. And it's very hard to utilize this unstructured data, and it only adds to my administrative burden, because now I also have to scan it and save it somewhere. So, and the whole claim filing industry is a downstream effect of this problem. So what does claim filing industry do? Claim filing industry is sort of the go-between of doctors and insurances, where a person sits in front of a computer and fills in numbers of, this is the patient's insurance number, this is the number of the code that the kind of exam that the doctor provided. So it kind of um, specifies the it's called work units of a doctor. Um, it and this whole industry is based on poor communication between um, between the doctor and insurance, or hospital and insurance, which needs to be good for efficiency, um, and actually that communication needs to be better also to avoid insurance fraud, which is pretty common. um, and then there are forces of centralization. So once as a patient, if I go to Stanford, let's say, and I have a knee surgery, and if I need a back surgery in the future, I might know a really good doctor who seems like the right fit for me, but I might just choose to go to Stanford because I feel more secure. Oh, Stanford has my data, so I guess I should go there. And who's going to try to figure out how to get my records to this doctor? So it's just you know easier for me to pick what I had already picked, even though it's not the best one. And the other problem when it comes to forces of centralization is that as a doctor, if I'm looking for a job, I'm more likely to just also join Stanford because, well, there's all these patients coming to Stanford. So it's hard to open my practice, do a lot of marketing. Even if I'm a great doctor, I have, there's this burden of figuring out how to save and share data, and I have to hire staff, and it just feels like too big a problem to solve for, a small doctor like me. So I'm gonna just join, what I was already there. So, those, those are some of the downstream effects. I'm sure that there are more we can talk about, but I want to move on to um, why blockchain is needed to change this. Um, so, a large reason of why people like doctors and hospitals to keep their data is that uh, they are the trust providers. Anything coming from patients, I have to take with a grain of salt. Maybe they don't understand well. Maybe it's not the complete set of data. Maybe it's an old data. So I think twice when the data is purely coming from patients. So there is need for a central trust provider. So we won't have that with this technology. The chronology and authenticity of data is important. It's possible to confirm the data source and have it in a certain sequence. Uh, it also helps. So the security of the data is increased, but the sharing of the data is easier, which is usually these two things go opposite. But with blockchain, they kind of go in synergy. And then there is a possibility of revocation lists for for people who have died, or if there's we're going to talk about it, but if there's a future marketplace for pharmacy, then you need revocation lists so that people don't reuse their prescriptions. So those are some ways I see blockchain technology being special, that can lead to unentanglement of this ball of wool. We can't solve the core problem by directly attacking it due to layers and layers of entrenched interest surrounding it. So what I believe is that to solve this problem, you pick a primary pain point, and then attacking it. So you pick this primary pain point and focus on improve that. So one such example, very basic need is finding the right doctor. So if I were to tell you, put your data on blockchain because I can use your data and I can help you match with the best doctor, and use machine learning algorithms to pick the best doctor who can best solve these kinds of problems. And the more data I get, the more I know about, the outcomes a certain doctor is providing um, for the the specific, disorder or illness that a person has. So that's a pretty, I would say, significant incentive, because it's such a basic thing, right? If you have this problem, you should go see this doctor, but it just is not how it works. It's simple, but it's more complicated, because we don't really have a system to do that. Um, so 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 I can imagine a future that at some point, not the AI is not just telling the patient, "Oh, this is a good person to see for this problem," but they're also making recommendation. Oh, like 80% of people who came, who have this problem, improved after yoga or physical therapy. So it kind of is making a treatment recommendation based on all of the data it has. And I think that's very powerful information for a person to have. Um, so and what other changes? So that's that's solving a very basic problem. But what downstream changes can it lead to in the future? And so one thing would be that patients want all of their data on blockchain for improved matching, right? So that's the immediate gratification, because it's immediate gratification is important for people, because it's hard for them to do what's good for them. Like, all of us know that we should go to gym every day, but how many of us do? So it's kind of the same thing. So there's this immediate gratification of, oh, I'm gonna find the right doctor for myself. And the the data that we get on blockchain, it would be structured. So it's easy to share that structured data. It's easy for doctors to make sense of it. For example, if I have, last 100 blood pressure readings of a patient, uh, and I can see it on a graph, and then
Vidushi, can I interrupt for a second? Because we're getting late and we know that it's very late for you. It's the middle of the night. So can you conclude? So we need to go. We have another session. Thank you.
okay, sure, sure. So I think in conclusion is that once patients have the power of their data in their hands, that is what lead to this unentanglement of this, ball of wool, and it leads to a lot of downstream effects, like better research, open pharmacy markets, cooperative insurance in the future, which is executed by smart contracts. So the possibility in future is endless if we give power to the right person. So that's basically my conclusion.
Thank you very, very much. And we hope we didn't take too much of your sleep because we know it's 3 o'clock in
It's
Stanford.
my
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.